Recognize Mr. Gabe Amo from Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Arrington, for holding today's hearing on the fiscal state of the nation. My Republican friends assert that our nation is in poor fiscal health, but refuse across this Congress to look into the mirror to see the real problem. Republicans are the ones pursuing a reckless plan that adds $14 trillion to the national debt. So I'm reminded of the budget resolution markup 3 months ago, and it is clear that it is not fiscal responsibility to slash Medicaid by $880 billion and cut SNAP by $230 billion to shovel tax breaks into the pockets of the wealthiest in our country. Medicaid delivers health care to a third of America, and SNAP helps feed 1 in 5 Americans. But this is what our Republican colleagues are tripping over themselves to cut actively right now, sitting in rooms, deciding how to do this. No messaging is going to cover up this scheme. Republicans claim they don't want to rip away health care from vulnerable Americans. Yet, the Congressional Budget Office has confirmed that the only way to find $880 billion in spending cuts is to cut Medicaid to the bone. The only way. This will hurt children, people with disabilities, seniors, new moms, and working class families, underscoring working families struggling to make ends meet. If you really want to protect Medicaid, I encourage my Republican colleagues to sign on to Ranking Member Boyle's discharge petition. Let's prevent harmful, unnecessary cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. That is on the line. People are depending on us. And so I would ask you, Mr. Linden, can you share briefly, as you have throughout this hearing, how slashing Medicaid by at least $880 billion, just to give tax breaks to the rich, would impact our long-term fiscal and economic outlook?
That's the right question, and the answer is if you take $1 away from Medicaid and spend $2 on tax breaks for the rich, you end up worse off than you'd started. And that's what's going on here. The problem in our fiscal outlook, I know there's disagreement about this, but the facts are very clear. 25 years ago, we knew that costs were going to go up on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as more Americans retired and entered retirement. That's exactly what happened, but actually costs have gone up more slowly than expected. So we're actually spending less on those programs than was expected. But the reason that our fiscal situation is so much worse is because we are cutting taxes so much over those same 25 years. I'll repeat again what I said in the beginning. If we had simply not done those tax cuts, debt today, even with the spending increases that have happened, it's true they have gone up on retirement and healthcare because of the retirement of the baby boom generation. Even with that, debt would be declining as a share of GDP, not increasing. So there is no value in cutting Medicaid for our fiscal purposes. And there's no value to the human beings who are receiving Medicaid. They need it to just make their way in the world. It's callous to put the burden of fiscal retrenchment on a family who relies on Medicaid or food stamps when we could just as easily, and in fact much more easily, ask the largest corporations in America just to pay a little bit more in taxes.
And to your point, this is not just numbers. These are people across this country, our constituents, all of ours, who are depending on us. And so I don't know why my Republican colleagues are laser focused and convinced that we have to hurt vulnerable Americans to offset tax breaks for the richest 1%. This does not have to be our reality. And there is time to act. And so as we look at the situation we're in, again, when we talk about the long-term fiscal health, we're talking about a Republican plan to add $14 trillion to the national debt when we know that the people being impacted are not nameless. They are people that matter to us. And that's fiscal insanity to me. And so, Mr. Linden, I know you recently testified about the importance of investing in programs for low-income Americans from both a moral and an economic perspective. Can you talk a little bit about how those cuts, beyond just the numbers, will have impacts beyond those programs specifically?
Yeah, think about a community where people, they shop in their local markets, they visit their local doctors, the rural hospital, maybe it's a rural community that has a hospital that relies on Medicaid. You cut these programs, and what ends up happening is, yes, the individual families are harmed. People can't afford food, they can't afford healthcare, they can't take their kids to the doctor. But the community around them is also harmed because now that market is not receiving a customer. Now that rural hospital has to close, and people around there have to drive much further to visit the hospital. And for what? So that there are wealthy people who have a slightly larger take-home pay at the end of the year, so that a corporation gets an extra tax break. That is not fiscal responsibility by any definition of the word.
My time has expired, but I want to end with this point. America first does not mean we put hardworking people last. And with that, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman from Rhode Island, and